There we go. All right, so I want to preface this by saying I have very limited knowledge of baseball whatsoever. I enjoy the game. I played it when I was in high school and stuff. But beyond that, I don't keep track of sports at all, really. That's not my thing. But I was watching Moneyball the other day with Brad Pitt, and that's what got me thinking about this, because I had one of those moments. Moneyball is this brilliant movie about how this one general manager basically redefined how you approach sports in general. And he used statistics to look for outcomes rather than general everything. So that's kind of the movie in a nutshell. So he updated that. But as I was watching, I realized, wow, this is something that's been sitting in the back of my consciousness for a while, something that I knew I should explore and discuss later, but I just hadn't found the right opportunity until today. So as Horace would say, I hope y'all are wearing socks, because if you are, they will be knocked off. No, I'm just kidding. Well, hopefully. So let's take a look first, before we dig into this. I mentioned that there was a reading in the Kybalion, which you could reference. Now, the point of that reading wasn't necessarily to go in depth on the principle of polarity itself, other than perhaps a couple points to remind you of our discussion of the principle of vibration. The two work hand in hand. And later on today in advanced studies, we're going to build on all of these ideas. So, which is always nice, is to lay some basic foundation that everyone can use. And then in the advanced studies, then elevate that to the next level so that we've got some more material to work with. So when we were in our reading, I'm going to pull out the Kybalion, the section that I wanted you to remember, switching glasses, begins on page 97 of the Kybalion. This is chapter 9. It's this version. So if you've got like the paperback version or something, it may be a different page. I apologize for that. It's in the paragraph that begins with, and it is this fact. Moving along, continuing, it says, and it is this fact that enables the Hermeticist to transmute one mental state into another along the lines of polarization. The context is that you can, as a person understanding these things, an alchemist, and these principles, you understand that the principle of polarization is that all things have poles, okay? Everything has its opposite, and that the difference between the opposite is a matter of degree. So you have hot and cold, high and low, rough and soft, and love and hate, and that you can transmute one of these aspects into another, as long as it's in the same pole, right? So for instance, I can't transmute love into up, or hate into west, right? But east and west are polarizations, and up and down are polarizations. But I can transmute love into hate and hate into love. Or anger into happiness, or happiness back into anger. These exist on the same plane, and therefore transmutation of one to the other is possible with the principle of polarization. So that was kind of a brief summation of that principle. Polarization is one of three aspects that are divided, that create cause and effect, as we discussed previously. The other two are vibration and rhythm, which are discussed in the Kybalion. The principle of vibration, polarization, and rhythm happen simultaneously. So because they each are an expression of the same event, right? So if a vibration is something that goes up and down in a sine wave, then the up and down of the sine wave represents the poles of that vibration, okay? And the sequence or the pacing of that up and down represents the rhythm. So long wavelength, slow rhythm, fast wavelength, high rhythm, right? Because it's going back so fast. So, and the rhythm then becomes a description of the vibration. Okay, so these are those principles that I wanted to bring us up to date on. Last week, we talked about the idea of mental influence and how, with the principle of vibration, using the concepts of polarization, you can mentally influence yourself and in turn your environment. You can, the key is being aware of yourself, having an active mind. And we're going to hammer home that equation that I've shared with you quite a bit today. The idea of active mind and will over passive mind equals alchemical outcome. Okay, that's your E equals MC squared of alchemy. This is the source that you can return back to and define it. An active mind is defined as a state of awareness, right? That you are aware of oneself. Passive mind is, let me go beyond that. Active mind is a conscious state of awareness that can be both projective or receptive, active or passive, but you're in the driver's seat when you're using active mind. Everything else around you is essentially passive mind until acted upon. And this is where we get into the baseball, okay? So this is where baseball then becomes an illustration of all of these concepts. First off, let's talk about baseball. When we're looking at baseball, let's take a look. We got this, we can look at it from a number of different ways. We can look at it structurally, okay, and we see here that we've got, first off, how many of you folks, and I don't mean to be insulting in any way, but how many folks are aware of baseball as a game? Like, have you gone to a baseball game and seen it happen? Okay, it's important. Like, it's an international audience, so sometimes people are like, no, I've actually never seen a baseball game, and don't necessarily know what it's about. So baseball is played, two teams, and you'll have a batter down here at the bottom. And in the field, we have 9 players, okay? The field itself is divided up into areas, which we're going to discuss later. The game itself is divided up into 9 innings. So this should start sounding a little bit familiar, because what I'm going to suggest to you is that baseball is an expression of Qabalah and the tree of life, okay, from a number of different ways to look at it. But in review, this is the tree of life right here. And the tree is divided into 4 worlds, okay? So we have the top domain up here. This is absolute. This is all about fire. This is the greatest form of light, which in fact is darkness. Now, before we get too far, don't forget we are talking about baseball, but before we get too far, I got to hammer in a certain concept. A lot of folks it baffled me for years, and I've tried to find a number of different ways to describe how limitless light is darkness. And the question is does it provide illumination? So when we look at light itself, and our experience of light, visual light is actually very narrow in the spectrum. But there's a whole bunch of light that exists outside of what we can see. And this light, like gamma rays, X-rays, cosmic rays, this light has such a high frequency of vibration that it can penetrate a great deal of things, but it can only be seen, and when it's seen by machines, it's in black and white, literally like the uppermost section of the tree. So that when you're looking, all the colors up here, we back up, take a look here, the colors which are describing it are black and white. That's a description of basically an experience, but not a visual understanding or appreciation of anything, because there is no actual visible light up there. the light is so exalted, so intense, that it is effectively darkness to those of us who live below that area. So it's kind of a tough thing. I used to use the analogy of, if you're in an interrogation chair and someone puts the light right in your face, how much of the room do you get to see? And the answer is none of the room. You don't get to see the interrogator, you can't see the room, you just see the light, which effectively blinds you, because nothing can be seen because of the intensity of the light. So, all right, let's see. Experts are baffled. That was Horace. So yeah, so anyway, so when looking at light, just keep in mind that the light which we perceive, the light which is visual, very narrow spectrum, and that light that exceeds our ability to perceive is effectively no light at all, but darkness, even though it is in fact intense light. So back to baseball. So when looking at baseball, then we're looking at the tree of life, and we're looking at it in three separate areas. Let's not use that one. We'll go back to this guy right here. So the game itself is held in 9 innings. The tree has 10 spheres. The last sphere is the one in which we are living, Malkut. So it doesn't need to be represented in the discussion of our game, which means the 9 spheres which precede it are describing different levels of activity in multiple ways. Okay, so each inning represents a descent into the material, right? The first inning all the way to the 9th inning, and then the game is concluded with the highest score, and then at the end of the 9th, totaling up, that's the victor. Okay, but they're working through 9 separate innings, and each inning involves an exchange where one group is the active group and the other group is the passive group. The one against the many, because it's the batter versus the field of players. Going back here, and so that we can visualize that, the batter represents the one, and then the field of players represents the many. The batter could represent infinite consciousness, because all of his team and all of their activities are compressed into him. The entire bench is compressed into his activity and what he does. Whereas the other team is fielded, so they represent finite intelligence over different spots within the field. Their obligation is only over that first base, say, or the second base, or the third base. All right, so finite intelligence, finite development, finite occupation, what they do. The batter has the freedom to move through all of the worlds around him. So the batter is, remember we talked previously about acting in proxy. Well, what we're seeing here is kind of a form of passion play, wherein the players, the batter is acting in proxy for us, engaging against the challenges of the field that are presented in life. So when we talk about the elements of the game, okay, and this is, by the way, why I believe, backing up a little bit, the origin of the game is essentially an expression of Freemasonry. We have the square, which is right here, and then we have the compass, okay? And with that, you can build the entire universe. So the universe then is presented, as I described before. You have 3 elements. You have the director, which would be the coach, telling the players who fields and what they do. You have the actors, which are the players, literally the players acting out the play. And then there's the audience, that's us. who are both participating in proxy, which is why we get so excited, because it's our team, right? Which means it's an extension of me, my city, my neighborhood, everything about me. That's why people get so crazy about the game, because unknowingly they have, through the process of induction, have had their consciousness enveloped by the process of the game. And this is true of every other sport too, but baseball is unique because its pacing is so slow. And the reason for that is to allow you to contemplate each play as it unfolds. So let's take a look at the world. Well, backing up here, let's take a look at the elements then of the game, specifically the ball and the bat, and what each of those represent. So the ball, which incidentally is white, represents the, let's pop that bad boy up there. There we go. The ball represents the sphere of Keter. It represents the potential, which is both active and passive at the same time. The pitcher also stands in the role of Keter, throwing the ball, which then takes on the aspect of the fool, okay, as it's descending towards the bat, which is Chokmah. Remember, the bat is a masculine projective. Chokmah, definitely phallic in its thing, right down to colloquial expressions about phallicism, like the nature of the bat is wood. I'll leave it at that. But the idea is that the batter is taking on the aspect of the sacred masculine as presented within Chokmah. Okay, so the ball is being pitched. Now, here's an interesting concept, and this is where Isaac Newton and his first law come into play. While it shows you the principle of polarity in motion, and it's extraordinary. While the ball is in the pitcher's hand, the pitcher is essentially the architect of the game at that point. His decision on how he's going to grip the ball and throw the ball will determine the next few things that happen. Is it going to be a ball? Will it be a strike? Or will the batter actually strike the ball? This is the idea as presented in a concept of consciousness as it extends out of Keter, as a chair or what have you, into the universe in its archetypal form. And in its archetypal form, as the ball is flying, it represents both the active and passive principle in one thing. The way this works is we fall back on Isaac Newton. Once the ball is in motion, even though it is active, an object in motion will remain in motion until acted upon by another motion. By definition, that's passive. So it requires a bat to strike the ball, which means the moment that ball has left his hand, it carries within it the sacred feminine, as well as the fact that it's acting in the masculine principle. When the ball strikes the bat, the resistance of the bat is in actuality an exemplification of the sacred feminine, because that's reception and resistance. So you receive the ball, but you strike it. And after striking it, it then goes into sacred masculine because it's active and assuming a new direction, going out into a field like the tree of receptive bodies, which are then sacred feminine until they catch the ball and throw it back into play. So what we're seeing here is a beautiful illustration of the principle of polarity in moment by moment that's actually observable in a real metaphysical context. So let's take a look then and look more closely at the three worlds. I'm going to back and look at this one here. We're going to look a little bit more closely at the, let's go back here. The three worlds that we're descending through, okay? And so that you understand, in order to make the universe, one needs only to have fire, water, and air. which is what the Yod He Vav He is, right? Yod, fire, He, water, Vav, air, and another He, even though we see that as a really slowed down version of water, which we call earth, it's still water. So 3 elements. And by the way, when you're reading and you're looking at the tree and you're asking yourself, why is it that we can find evidences of those 3 elements, but not earth? It's because the tree is written from the standpoint of earth. We live in earth and we act in earth. Therefore, we don't need to put earth on the tree since we're there. We're trying to move out of that and up into a higher vibratory state. Therefore, earth is not mentioned. And similarly, when we talk about baseball and we look at the divisions of activity within the field as we work our way out from the pitcher's mound to the home plate and from there back out into the field, as we're looking at that, we're recognizing the same principle, okay? That we're not going to see earth because we start and finish there, all right? And everything else is the activity outside of that. So absolute, or the archetypal world, that involves the pitcher, the batter, and the catcher. The pitcher is Keter, the batter is Chokmah, and the catcher is Binah. Okay? Now here's the really cool part of all this. Okay? The really cool part, in the creative act, it's Binah who makes the decision as to what Keter is going to do. Remember, Binah says, let there be light. First act of creation, verbal. It's sound. It is the word, the logos. Okay? And in the game of baseball, the pitcher is looking to the catcher for the catcher to tell the pitcher what pitch to throw. So just in the same way, you get Binah getting the last word in Qabalah. Also, Binah gets the last word within baseball. So in describing it, so when we're looking at it here, then what we have is Keter, right here, the pitcher, Chokmah, the guy with the bat, and Binah, the catcher. What about this dude back here? What about the umpire? Remember when we talked in our advanced studies class? Now, some of you haven't been there, but you may have seen the video, and we talked about judgment and the judgment card and how that card, as a representative of the sacred feminine, is everywhere. She represents all 22 paths because her activities represent a balancing act of forces in each one of those domains and in each one of those zones. So in baseball, you have the umpire who is the judge, okay? But this person is divided into 3 forms. So we have your first base umpire, your third base umpire. It looks like, is that an umpire over there? They introduced a second, well, anyway, the umpire is present within each of these zones. So yes, so at the point of activity here, you have an umpire who's determining the activity between Keter, Chokmah, and Binah. And that decision, if the ball is in play and everything is fine, then it goes out into the field where justice is represented again out here in the field at each one of the different plates to make sure and a determination that everything is going as it should. So the first world then, when looking at the tree as baseball, this is the supernal triangle, Keter, Chokmah, and Binah. The next triangle, Keter, Chokmah, and Binah, is within the realm of Braya. Braya represents this next level down. It's the creative world. So we have first, second, and third base, right? As you're working around. And each of those, this is the realm of water. So within water, we understand the element of passage, because water is where you have to pass. So the player must pass through the creative realm and all 3 worlds of the creative realm. So their first base is Absolute, second base, Braya, third base, Yetzirah, and then they swing back into home, where they're then regenerated, right? Reincarnation into the next play. And each player represents actually the same person, just stepping up again and again and again in a new and different incarnation. So, and what that is an expression of universal generation of consciousness, because each player introduces a different aspect of the same thing. They're all baseball players, but some might swing from the left, some might swing from the right, some might be really good at bunting, some might be good at running. They all are different, and they all bring with them their strengths, which I learned all about while watching Moneyball, how that actually works. So it got me to thinking and recognizing the utility of baseball. So the next realm, as we work our way out, so we have absolute here in the center, pitcher, batter, catcher, then first, second, and third base. That's Braya. And then way out here, where usually an air ball will be hit, is Yetzirah, the domain of air. And what's really interesting is that the activities of each of these domains identify their color theory. So that, for instance, and what I mean by that is, you'll not see, unless there's some horrible catastrophe going on, a first baseman run all the way to third base and take over that job or whatever. They stay just like primary colors on their spot. That's their spot. You won't see a third baseman go running off somewhere. No, that's his spot, and he stays there. But when you get out into the field, and this is almost a trope, because it's sort of funny that sometimes outfielders need a kind of mental telepathy, because the ball is right between the two of them, and one of them has to make a decision which one of them is going to catch the ball. This is like an expression of a tertiary color, where two things have been combined and you get a third thing, right? Where one bows knee to the other and it becomes green or purple or orange. And in the same context, you have out here in the outfield, just as you had Keter, Chokmah, and Binah, and on first base you have Chesed, setting up the vibe for the entire game. First baseman, hardest freaking role in the game I learned recently, because of the nature of what's required of a first baseman. So the principle of vibration established there. Second baseman represents polarization, and of course they stand between the two poles, right? So they're polarization, or they could. Now I'm going to stick with my guns. I'm seeing it as polarization, and the third baseman is rhythm, because the third baseman is the one with the last. They get the final say on the activity of the ball. They're the one who's going to be the guy who takes that line drive, catches it, throws it to the catcher. It just seems to me like that can exist, but I'm flexible. I'm not necessarily married to it. Only thing I'm married to is the idea that when we get out into the bases, you have a clear, distinct relationship between those, which is dramatically different from the field. So, and that it's still baseball, but when you get into the field, now we're in the domain of Yetzirah, and everything that happens out there involves the ball being in the air almost always. I mean, yeah, there are grounders that go out there, but to return the ball must pass through the air at, great height and velocity in order to make it back into play. So when looking at baseball, we get a really, really clear expression of the tree of life, but as a game. And that, to me, was really, really cool. The best part, though, was seeing an expression of the polarization that takes place, because there's one more thing I want to focus on, and that's these two guys right here, okay? The Chokmah and Binah of the game, the batter and the catcher. This is where the principle of polarity saves the day, because what we're seeing, the visual truth that we see, is that they are separate from each other, right down to they're wearing different uniforms and they're playing on different teams. But the truth is that the game itself represents the universe on the whole. So there is no separation, which means the batter needs the catcher. If there were no catcher, the ball would simply go on, hypothetically, forever, which means that that first limitation, which is extended out from Keter into Chokmah, and then that Chokmah into Binah, that line, there's a point where it stops, where the line, Binah says it ends here. And so the catcher says it ends here. They catch the ball. The best way to, so what you're seeing then is you're seeing them as a single unit. And the way to express that is to look directly down on them as a yin and yang. So that the male aspect of the yin has the black dot in the center, and the female aspect of the yang has the white dot in the center. What this means is that for the male aspect of Chokmah to be the male aspect, it still must rotate under the feminine principle. And for the receptive principle of the yang to operate, it must at its core have a masculine principle to operate it. We only get to see half at one time, which is what the principle of polarity in the Kybalion teaches us, that all truths are but half-truths. So, and yet all things are one thing. So the player who's the batter and the player who's the catcher represent a sphere in and of themselves when seen from top to bottom. They represent that aspect of the total game in one moment. And the moment is the moment, as the Greeks would say, the moment of crisis, that moment of contact, where the ball hits the bat, and then from that point, or the bat hits the ball, which would probably be more correct, when the bat hits the ball, and then the game is in play. That the universe from that point forward has been created. It unfolds, and like in Hinduism, where the Brahma opens his eyes and the universe manifests, when the ball is finally caught and returned to the pitcher, then the Brahma closes his eyes to open them yet again to manifest a new universe. And the cycle continues, one after the other. One team playing until they have, and here's the building of the threes, which is also really cool. Each game, you have a player and each player has 3 strikes, and then they're out. That's 3 descents down into matter, at which point they're grounded, right? They are now in the element of earth. They're down and out, literally down and out. They're out. So because once you pass through that 3rd realm, then you're out. You've been removed. So there are 3 strikes, and then you're out. There are 3 outs, and then the game exchanges hands, so that the masculine becomes the feminine, and the feminine becomes the masculine. So, how was that? How are we doing, guys? We doing all right? And you can do this, by the way. It doesn't require. When I meditated on baseball, I didn't go and watch a game on ESPN or anything. It doesn't require that. If you know enough of it, you can just sit there and look at the field and then see the game. You can visualize it. You can slow-mo it. That's what I did. I sat there and contemplated as the pitcher threw the ball, and I'm thinking, wow, that ball's not doing anything. It's just sitting there waiting for someone to hit it. The fact that it's moving fast is incidental. That's a component of its existence, but it's not doing anything, which is exactly the way to look at Keter. All potential, but it's just waiting for something to act upon that potential, to express that potential into something greater. So, baseball. It's awesome. And I'm certain that, I have a certainty that this is the reason why we call it the Great American Pastime, because the founders of our Constitution were Freemasons. The game was clearly developed by people with Masonic understanding. And the goal was to create a kind of public temple. Oh, I noticed the idea of that is, you might have missed. It's right here. It's in the field itself, the square and the compass, right there on the surface of the field. So, and that is the most fundamental expression of Freemasonry. The whole thing, like, it's just a complete expression of that. And of course, that Freemasonry is an effort to express Kabbalah, right? That's the whole point of it. Is it's an expression of a much older thought or understanding, which is an expression of the universe at large in its multitudinous functions. So, all right. How's everyone doing?
Something I noticed, I don't know if how significant it is or if it's intentional at all, but when you point out square and compass is kind of shown there on the field as the field. There are 7 fielders if you count first, second, third base, shortstop, and the 3 outfielders, and yet the heptagon can't be constructed through the geometer's tools using the Vesca Pisces the way all the other polygons can. It's one of the mysterious things about 7. So just food for thought.
No, that's cool. In fact, I was going to, it wasn't going to be in here, but one of the things that I've been saving up are breaking down the spine and looking at the vertebrae of the spine in relation to the tree of life and Kabbalah. For instance, that, you have 7 cervical vertebrae, 12 vertebrae of the thoracic region, and 5 of the lower region, that the pelvis itself looks like a shovel. It looks like a spade, like when seen from the side. And so the idea of that descent is a descent of consciousness from the mind all the way down into reality, right? The pelvis, which then houses the hips, which allows motility, so progression of the soul through the world. Each of the cervical vertebrae, the 7 then relating to the planets, the 12 relating to the zodiac, the 5 relating to the 5 elements, right? The quintessence. So the body itself becomes a physical map and a reminder tool. And of course, there are 32 vertebrae, which mean 32, or I'm sorry, 20. My brain, let's see, 22, yes. So anyway, which are the major arcana of the tarot. So then you can talk about your teeth too, 32 teeth, right? Anyway, the body itself is a tool to remind ourselves of the nature of the universe, of Kabbalah. It's why palmistry is useful, right? To look at your hand, not so much as a method. I mean, you could, I suppose, use it as a method of prognostication. My daughter has been a palmistry reader for a long time. But for me, it's because the palm of the hand then teaches you about the zodiac. It teaches you about the idea of Keter Chokmah and Binah, because reason and logic are in the thumb, right? So, and that's the expression of reality, which then is seen through the zodiac and the 4 elements as presented. Like the palmistry, we can talk about that some other time, but definitely there are multiple tools that are available for us, and that's why baseball's fun, because you can use it as a tool to help you discover basic stuff about the tree of life, about life itself. I mean, there's a lot of metaphor that can go into the game, and obviously I romanticize it a bit, but baseball is heavily romanticized. So there, it's so heavily romanticized. So, yeah. Any other questions or comments? No, we good?
We're good.
Awesome. All right. Well, there you go, guys. Baseball, Kabbalah, and the principle of polarization. And so I guess I will see most of you back at 1 o'clock for advanced studies.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. We'll talk
Thanks,
to you
Aubrey.
soon. You bet. Bye-bye.